The wind had died hours ago, yet the fog over Willow Town still moved like it was breathing. Midnight lay heavy over the cracked roads and leaning mailboxes, and far beyond the last flickering streetlight, up on Willow Hill, the silhouette of St. Margaret's Church rose like a scar against the moon. Nobody went there anymore. They said it was cursed, that something evil had been trapped when the fire took 13 lives inside its walls 42 years ago. But that night, when the town was sleeping, the bell rang again, one long, hollow chime that rolled down the hill and through the empty streets like thunder crawling on its belly. Miles Parker was parked at the edge of the woods in his rusted pickup, half drunk, half lost, staring at his reflection in the cracked rearview mirror. The sound hit him like a memory. It wasn't loud, just wrong, like something heavy was being forced awake. He turned down the radio, eyes narrowing toward the distant hill where fog gathered. Like smoke. Nobody had touched that bell in decades, not since the fire. He rubbed his hands together, breath visible in the cold, and told himself he wasn't about to drive up there. But regret is louder than reason. He twisted the key, and the engine grumbled alive. The road to Willow Hill had no lights, just endless trees pressing against both sides, their branches reaching like black fingers across the path. The fog thickened the higher he drove, wrapping around the truck until even the headlights looked weak. Miles leaned forward, knuckles white on the steering wheel, his chest tight with something between fear and curiosity. The church appeared suddenly through the mist, a dark mass of stone and shadow. The bell tower loomed crooked, its iron cross bent, its roof torn open like a wound. The last time he'd seen that place, he'd been a kid, though he couldn't remember why he'd been there or what he'd seen. Only that the memory made him sick to his stomach. He parked the truck and cut the engine. The silence afterward was unbearable. Even the crickets refused to sing. He stepped out, boots sinking into damp leaves, and the air hit him like breath from an open grave. The smell of wet ash lingered in the fog. His flashlight cut a thin beam across the rotting wooden doors, still sealed with blackened nails. He raised the light higher, tracing the carved symbol above the entrance, an angel missing its head. Something about it made his throat tighten. Then came a whisper, soft and close, though there was no wind. "You came back." Miles spun around, the beam slicing through the dark, but there was nothing. Only fog and the low groan of wood shifting overhead. He swallowed hard, telling himself it was the wind, but his heartbeat betrayed him. He moved around the side of the church, boots crunching glass and gravel. The old cemetery lay behind it, rows of sunken graves and crooked crosses swallowed by weeds. His light swept across the headstones until it caught movement. A small figure, pale, still, standing near the bell tower. He froze. A girl, barefoot, wearing a white dress, soaked as if she had walked out of a lake. Her hair clung to her face, hiding her eyes, and her hands hung limp by her sides. She didn't move, didn't speak. The fog pulsed around her like it was alive. Miles felt every instinct scream at him to leave, but he couldn't move. "Hey," he muttered under his breath, unsure if he'd actually spoken. The girl's head tilted slightly, a slow, unnatural motion. Then she turned and stepped backward into the fog, vanishing without a sound. He stumbled forward, his flashlight shaking, and reached the spot where she'd been standing. The ground was soft with mud, marked with small footprints, bare feet, fresh. Beside them lay a burnt child's shoe, half-melted leather glistening with dew. Miles crouched, reaching for it, but before he touched it, the bell above groaned and began to sway. It creaked once, twice, and then struck. The sound tore through the air, low and heavy, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. He stumbled back, eyes darting to the tower. The rope hung still. Nothing should have moved that bell. A rush of whispers rose all around him, overlapping, desperate, like dozens of voices murmuring from underground. He spun in circles, flashlight cutting across gravestones, tree trunks, fog, but no one was there. Then, faintly, through the mist, he saw light flickering from the church's broken windows, orange, soft, like candlelight. He took a hesitant step closer. The whispers faded. Only the bell's echo remained, humming in his bones. He pressed his hand against the cold stone wall and peered through the shattered glass. Inside, something was burning. Not flames, but faint trails of glowing ash drifting in the air like fireflies. The pews were still there, blackened and half-melted, arranged. Before the altar that had split down the center, A shadow moved behind it, slow, human-shaped. He blinked and it was gone. Miles stumbled back, breath ragged, heart hammering in his ears. He turned toward his truck, desperate to get away, but then he saw it again at the edge of the fog, the same girl, standing now beside his truck door. Her hair hung over her face, dripping onto the dirt, one pale hand pressed against the glass. Miles froze mid-step. The girl lifted her face slowly, and for a brief, horrible second, the flashlight caught her eyes, black hollows, empty but alive. Her mouth opened wider and wider until it stretched unnaturally, and a sound poured out, not a scream, but a moan that crawled beneath his skin. The truck headlights flickered. The fog twisted violently around her. Miles stumbled backward, tripping on the uneven ground, and when he looked up, she was gone again. Only her handprint remained on the window, wet and smeared with ash. The bell rang one last time, a long, drawn-out note that felt less like sound and more like memory. Miles got into the truck and slammed the door, his hands trembling. As he started the engine, the headlights flickered on, cutting through the fog as he sped down the hill. In the rearview mirror, the church faded into the mist, the tower swaying gently as if waving goodbye. But just before it disappeared, the faint outline of a figure appeared in the tower window, watching him leave. Miles didn't look again. He just kept driving until the bell's echo finally died in the distance. But even then, deep in the pit of his stomach, he felt something that refused to let go, the sinking, icy certainty that whatever had rung that bell wasn't calling him to the church. It was calling him back. Miles didn't sleep that night. The sound of that bell still lived in his skull, looping endlessly, even when he covered his ears. He sat in his small kitchen with every light on, the radio whispering static, the clock refusing to tick. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, but something inside that silence felt wrong, like the air itself was waiting. He tried calling the sheriff's office just before dawn, but the line crackled with static, then dropped dead. When he tried again, the voice on the other end wasn't the dispatcher. It was a child whispering, "You shouldn't have gone back." The phone fell from his hand and hit the floor, still humming faintly. By sunrise, Miles was packed. He told himself he'd leave town for good, drive until the fog disappeared and the sound of bells stopped echoing in his head. But when he stepped outside, there was something sitting on the hood of his truck, the burnt shoe, the same one from the graveyard. Only now it was dry and tied neatly like it belonged to someone waiting to be worn again. His breath caught in his throat. The air around the truck shimmered faintly, like heat rising off asphalt, though the morning was cold. He reached out slowly, fingertips trembling as he lifted the shoe. Beneath it, on the hood, were small black fingerprints pressed into the paint, 5 on each side. Child-sized, Miles dropped the shoe and stumbled backward, his heart racing. Then he heard its soft humming, distant but clear, a song he hadn't heard since he was a boy. Church choir music. He turned his head toward Willow Hill. The sound floated down through the mist like something alive. The church bells were silent, but the voices weren't. He stood frozen for a long time, the hum fading and returning, almost rhythmic. Then, against all reason, he got in the truck and started driving back. Every turn felt heavier than the last. The fog was thicker now, crawling across the asphalt like smoke spilling from unseen cracks. As he reached the hilltop, the music grew louder, not joyful like a hymn, but twisted, off-key, voices dragging each note like a dying breath. The church stood in the fog just as before, silent and cold, but faint orange light flickered behind. The broken windows again. Miles killed the engine and stepped out, drawn by something he didn't understand. Each step toward the door felt heavier, the air thicker. When he reached the entrance, the blackened nails were gone. The doors hung half open, one creaking softly as if breathing. The stench hit him first, ash, mold, and something sweet, like rotting flowers. Inside, the floor was a mosaic of soot and glass, the pews blackened skeletons. Candles burned on the altar, dozens of them, their flames bending sideways as if reacting to his presence. He stepped inside, boots crunching debris, eyes darting through the haze, and then he saw them. Rows of figures sitting in the pews, motionless, their heads bowed, all wearing choir robes, their fabric faded and burned at the edges. Their hands rested neatly in their laps. Miles froze, the flashlight trembling in his hand. None of them moved, but the sound, the humming, was coming from them. It was faint but real, vibrating through the floorboards. He lifted the light, sweeping it across the rows. The faces were pale and cracked, skin flaking like old wax. Empty sockets stared down at him, books that had fused into their laps. He stumbled backward, his breath shaking. The humming stopped all at once. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then one of the figures raised its head. The movement was slow and creaky, like wood bending under strain. Its mouth opened, and a single sound escaped, a breath, dry and low. Sing. Miles turned and ran, but the doors slammed shut behind him with a force that made the entire building shudder. He hit the wood hard, pushing and kicking, but it wouldn't move. The candles flickered violently, flames stretching tall and blue. The air grew hotter. The pews began to vibrate, and one by one, the heads of the choir turned toward him. Their mouths opened in unison, releasing a single, terrible note. It wasn't human. The sound rattled the windows, the walls, his bones. The temperature dropped instantly, and the candles went out. Miles stumbled back, gasping in the dark. His flashlight flickered. He pointed it toward the altar. The cross behind it was burning not with fire, but with light, glowing from the inside out. A figure stood in front of it, arms spread, its body charred beyond recognition. It wore a priest's collar, half melted into its skin. Its head turned slowly toward Miles, one eye socket glowing red. "You left us," it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. "You let them burn." Miles staggered back, shaking his head. He didn't understand. He had never been part of this place, not really. But deep down, something twisted in his memory. Faces, voices, a child screamed through smoke. The priest stepped forward, his body cracking with each movement. The choir rose behind him, their movements jerky, lifeless. "The bell calls for the living and the damned," the priest said. "And you, Miles, have answered both." The flashlight died. Darkness swallowed everything. Miles stumbled blindly, hands scraping walls, trying to find the door. But the church had changed. The walls pulsed under his palms, soft and warm like flesh. The air was thick with smoke and whispers. He tripped, falling onto something wet. When he reached down, his hands came up red. Blood pooled around his boots, spreading from cracks in the floorboards. Then, faintly through the darkness, came the soft giggle of a child, the same voice that had spoken through his phone. A faint glow appeared ahead, a small figure standing by the altar, the girl. Her face was half burned now, her eyes hollow, the white dress torn, and dripping with black soot. She lifted her hand, pointing toward him. "It's your turn," she said, voice small but echoing like thunder. The bell above rang again, though no one touched it. The sound rippled through the air, and every candle reignited, bursting with blood-red light. Miles screamed as the floor gave way beneath him. He fell through darkness, through heat, through the faint echo of the choir's broken song. The church swallowed him whole. The bell rang one final time, shaking the night air outside. Then silence. When the fog cleared from Willow Hill that morning, the church stood still and lifeless. But the bell tower swayed slightly in the wind, and if anyone had been close enough to listen, they would have heard faint humming coming from inside, low, steady, and human. The air was thick and black, filled with floating ash that burned Miles's lungs with every breath. He hit the ground hard and rolled onto wet earth, gasping. Somewhere above, the faint toll of the bell echoed, slower now, almost like a heartbeat. His flashlight was gone, his hands scraped and bleeding. The soil beneath his palms felt wrong, warm, soft, almost pulsing. When he lifted one hand, a small shape crawled from the dirt, a centipede, its legs slick with blood. He scrambled backward and his spine hit stone. He aimed his trembling gaze upward. He was underground, inside what looked like a crypt, but it wasn't built with stone bricks. The walls were layered bones, skulls pressed into the mud like a foundation. Thousands of them, hollow-eyed, grinning in the dim red light that seeped from cracks above. He tried to steady his breath, but every inhale came with a faint whisper, words he couldn't understand. Then he saw it, a tunnel ahead, low and narrow, leading deeper beneath the church. The ground slopped downward, the soil damp with something that wasn't water. His instinct screamed to climb back, to escape, but there was no way. Up. The hole he'd fallen through had closed. Only darkness remained above. He picked up a fragment of metal from the ground, maybe a candle holder, maybe a weapon, and began crawling through the tunnel. Every movement echoed softly, each shuffle answered by a faint scraping somewhere ahead. The air grew colder the deeper he went. His breath came out white. His hand brushed against something rough, a wooden doorframe buried halfway into the dirt. The tunnel widened slightly, and he stepped into a circular chamber. At first glance, it looked like a cellar. Then his eyes adjusted. It wasn't. The walls were covered in children's drawings, crude sketches burned into the rock with ash and soot. Each showed the same thing: a church on fire, people inside screaming, and a dark figure standing outside the flames holding a bell rope. Below the drawings, scrawled in uneven letters, was one phrase repeated again and again: "He rings for the forgotten." Miles felt his stomach drop. He turned toward the center of the room and saw a massive iron bell lying on its side, cracked but whole, half buried in the dirt. Its surface was carved with strange markings, twisting symbols that looked almost alive when the red light flickered. The same humming sound he'd heard upstairs seemed to come from inside the bell now, faint but constant. He crouched closer, hands trembling, drawn by that low vibration. For a moment he thought he saw movement inside the bell, a shape shifting, like liquid shadow. Then the metal shuddered violently, and a burst of air hit his face. Like a scream, he fell backward, coughing, as the ground began to tremble. From the cracks around the bell, dark liquid started seeping out. It smelled like blood. He scrambled away, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then, faintly, over the sound of the dripping and the whispers, he heard a voice, low, calm, familiar. "You remember now, don't you?" Miles froze. The voice wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It was inside his head. He gritted his teeth, shaking his head, but images began to flicker behind his eyes, flashes of fire. A boy running through smoke, screams of women, the bell swinging wildly as the roof collapsed, and him. He saw himself younger, standing outside the burning church with the rope in his hands, pulling it over and over, his face wet. With tears, he stumbled back, shouting that it wasn't real. But the voice came again, closer now. "You rang it, Miles. You called the dead." He spun around, scanning the darkness. The bell shuddered again, and from its hollow mouth, something began to crawl out. A hand, thin and blackened like charcoal, clawed at the earth, followed by a second, then a face half-burned, eyes white and sightless. The figure dragged itself free. The priest, the same one from the altar, his body now smoking, the collar fused into his flesh. Behind him, dozens more began to emerge from the ground, their bodies distorted and half-formed, each whispering the same broken hymn. The whispers chased him, growing louder, almost mocking. "You left us, you left us, you left us." The words bounced off the stone, multiplying. He fell once, slicing his knee open, the pain grounding him for a second. He forced himself up, clawing his way forward until he saw a faint light ahead, a staircase leading upward. He climbed 2 steps at a time, desperate, until his hand hit something solid, a trapdoor. He shoved it open and crawled out into a narrow hallway lined with stained glass windows. He was back inside the church, but it wasn't the same. The windows glowed red as if they were lit from outside by flames. The air smelled of burnt incense and flesh. Shadows moved along the walls, tall and thin, their shapes wrong, bending in directions light shouldn't allow. Miles limped down the corridor, trying to find an exit. The church was alive now, breathing. He could hear the creak of its wood like joints flexing, the moan of nails pulling from the frame. He reached a door and pushed it open. Inside was the old vestry shelves of books, a broken desk, rotted cloth, and sitting in the center of the room was the girl. Her face was clearer, burned, her dress white again but soaked to the hem. She stared at him with wide eyes that seemed both innocent and ancient. "You were supposed to save us," she whispered. "You promised you'd come back." Miles felt his knees weaken. He didn't remember that. But something inside him knew she wasn't lying. "You were the altar boy," she continued, standing slowly. "You ran when the fire started. You left the door locked." Her voice broke on the last word, and the candles around her flared to life, all burning black. They couldn't get out. Tears stung his eyes. "I didn't mean to," but the words caught in his throat. His memory burned bright now, his younger self hiding behind the church as the fire roared, the screams echoing from inside, too afraid to go back, the priest calling his name before the roof caved in, the bell ringing on its own long after the fire died. The girl stepped closer, and her eyes turned dark. "They ring it every night," she said softly, "until the last one comes home." Miles backed away, shaking. The walls trembled, and the distant sound of the bell began again, deep and slow. The girl's face twisted into something inhuman, her mouth stretching too wide as she screamed the next words. "Welcome home, Miles." The walls burst open, hundreds of burned hands reaching through, grabbing him, pulling him toward the altar. He screamed and thrashed, but they dragged him across the floor as the church's heart began to beat again, thunderous and wet. Somewhere above, the bell continued to ring, and beneath its echo, buried in the fire and blood, Miles finally remembered everything. Rain began to fall before midnight, a slow drizzle that painted the windows of Willow Town in gray streaks. Jenna sat alone in the diner, the same booth where Miles had once told her about the bell. The radio on the counter whispered static. The lights flickered every few minutes. She hadn't seen Miles in 2 days. His truck had been found at the edge of Willow Hill, engine dead, driver's door wide open. The sheriff said maybe he'd wandered off drunk again, but Jenna knew better. The air in town felt heavy, restless, like the silence before a funeral. When the clock struck 12, the power died. For a heartbeat, everything was black. Then came the sound, the faint toll of a bell rolling down the hill. She froze, coffee cup trembling. In her hand, one chime, then another. The same rhythm Miles had described. She whispered his name, but only her own echo answered. She grabbed her coat and flashlight, ignoring the warning in her gut, and ran into the rain. The road to Willow Hill was mud and mist. Every step felt colder, the fog curling around her legs like smoke. She called out for Miles, her voice fading into the distance. The closer she came to the church, the quieter the night became. Even the rain seemed to pause. The outline of St. Margaret's appeared through the haze-broken windows, leaning tower, blackened stone that still smelled of ash after 4 decades. The front doors were open now, swinging gently in the wind, though there was no wind at all. Her flashlight beam caught movement near the bell tower stairs. A shadow, small. She swallowed hard and whispered, "Hello." No answer. Inside, the pews were gone. The floor was torn open in places, exposing deep cracks that breathed warm air. The smell was unbearable rot, candle wax, and smoke. On the altar lay a photo half buried in soot. She picked it up with shaking fingers. It was Miles as a child, standing with other boys in choir robes, smiling before a younger priest. The back of the photo read in faded ink, "St. Margaret's Children's Choir 1983, Jenna's breath caught." Miles hadn't just known the church, he'd belonged to it. She looked around, heart pounding. The candles on the altar lit themselves one by one, casting red light on the cracked walls. Shadows moved along them like something behind thin skin. A whisper came from the pulpit. He remembered. She turned. A figure stood there, half hidden by darkness, the priest, or what was left of him. His eyes were empty holes, his voice calm and echoing. He came home to finish what was begun. Jenna backed away, flashlight trembling. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice breaking. The priest tilted his head, bones creaking. Beneath, he called them, and they answered. The bell must not stop. As he spoke, the floorboards beneath her boots pulsed like a heartbeat. From the cracks seeped thin streams of water, black and smelling of rust. The bell above groaned, readying to ring again. Jenna turned to run, but the doorway had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of stone. Clawed at her throat, she pounded the wall, shouting for help. The church answered with laughter soft, layered, the voices of children. "Sing with us," they whispered. The candles flared blue. The pews she thought were gone were back now, filled with pale faces watching her. Among them sat Miles. His eyes were open but lifeless, his mouth moving silently with the others. "Miles!" she screamed, rushing toward him. But as she reached the first pew, the wood split open and a dozen hands burst from underneath, grabbing her legs, cold and strong. She struggled, kicking free, stumbling down the aisle. The congregation rose together, every head turning in jerky motion to follow her. She fled into a side corridor. The walls were slick, dripping with dark water. Every step echoed like she was inside a throat. Behind her, the bell rang once more, and the walls shuddered with the sound. A door appeared ahead, an old service door hanging, crooked on its hinges. She shoved it open and stumbled into what looked like a basement staircase spiraling downward. Against all reason she descended, the air growing hotter, the whispers louder. The stairs ended in a tunnel lit by flickering candles jammed into the skulls along the walls. At the far end stood a small metal door. She pressed her ear against it and heard crying. A child's. She turned the handle and pushed it open. The room inside was round, the ceiling low. In the center lay the great cracked bell, the same one that had fallen from the tower decades ago. Its surface pulsed faintly with red light. Kneeling beside it was the girl in the white dress, her hair hiding her face. Jenna whispered softly, "Are you hurt?" The girl lifted her head slowly. Half her face was burned away, but her eyes were bright and alive. "He's still here," the girl said. "He rings it for them." Jenna asked who. The girl pointed to the bell. Everyone who forgot. Then she vanished into ash. The bell began to hum, deep, trembling, alive. The floor shook violently. Jenna stumbled backward as cracks opened beneath the bell, spilling water and bones. A shape rose from the gap. The priest again, his arms spread wide, his voice booming. "The living cannot silence the faithful." The bell rang, shaking the walls until plaster rained from above. Jenna covered her ears, screaming, but the sound came from inside her skull. Then a flash images burning through her mind. Miles pulling the bell rope as a child, the priest locking the doors, the fire swallowing them all, the bell ringing long after death, the priest's laughter. She dropped to her knees, clutching her head. The bell stopped. Silence. Smoke filled the chamber, curling around her like fog. Then a new sound, the faint echo of footsteps from behind. A young woman's voice called out, echoing down the stairwell. "Hello? Is someone down here?" Jenna turned toward the doorway, eyes wide. A flashlight beam cut through the smoke. The face behind it was unfamiliar, pale, rain-soaked, terrified. "I'm looking for my brother," the woman said. "His name's Noah. He came here tonight." Jenna tried to speak, but her voice was gone. The girl stepped closer, glancing around the chamber, the beam landing on the great bell. Outside, the wind howled. The church groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Jenna whispered with the last of her strength, "Don't let it ring." But the newcomer Amelia had already stepped closer, her hand brushing the cracked surface of the bell. It was warm beneath her fingers. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, somewhere above, the ropes tightened and the bells of Willow Town began to toll again, louder than ever, echoing down through the earth. The light burst. The floor gave way, and Jenna's scream was lost to the sound of the church being reborn. The night of October rain had turned into a downpour so heavy it felt like the entire sky was trying to drown Willow Town. Lightning cracked across the hills, slicing the clouds open as thunder rolled like a funeral drum over the soaked earth. The church loomed ahead, its tall spire leaning like a dying giant, its stained glass windows broken and trembling in the wind. Amelia's flashlight flickered as she stumbled through the mud, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. She could still hear Noah's last scream echoing in her head. That sound didn't belong to anything human. The church door was open now, not just open, inviting. Inside, candlelight flickered faintly, the scent of rot and incense, mixing into a suffocating perfume. She stepped inside, mud dripping from her boots, the heavy wooden door groaning shut behind her. The air changed instantly, thick, warm, humming with low voices that came from nowhere. The pews were filled again, the same shadowed figures she'd seen earlier now clearer, their faces hollow, skin hanging in gray folds, eyes glowing, faintly like dying coals. A woman in a decayed wedding dress sat in the front row, her hands clasped around a rosary of teeth. Beside her, an old priest's corpse-like face turned toward Amelia. "Welcome back, child," he whispered through a mouthful of soil. Amelia froze. Her flashlight died completely, and the only light left came from the pulpit where the bell ropes hung down, twitching on their own like veins pulsing in a dead man's neck. The bells above began to toll, slow and uneven, each clang shaking the wooden beams. Boom, boom, boom. Dust fell from the ceiling. The congregation rose to their feet, all turning toward her in perfect, jerky unison. She stepped backward, heart hammering, but something soft brushed against her ankle. She looked down. A small child's hand, gray and wet, was reaching out from under the pews, gripping her tightly. Dozens more hands emerged from the dark beneath the benches, crawling, pulling themselves upward, men, women, children, all drowned, burned, and broken. The church floor rippled like a graveyard exhaling. "You shouldn't have come back," the priest whispered again, now standing right behind her, though she hadn't seen him move. His breath smelled of blood and candle wax. The town forgot this place for a reason. Lightning struck again, and for an instant, Amelia saw the walls peeling. Away the church wasn't a church anymore. It was hollowed wood and bone, a ribcage of something vast and buried. The cross above the altar turned black, melting into the shape of a figure with wings made of human arms. The bells tolled faster, louder, until it felt like her skull was vibrating. She tried to run toward the door, but the floor collapsed beneath her feet. She fell into darkness, screaming as she plunged through rotted boards, through thick, wet soil, down into a stone chamber below. It was the crypt. The smell hit her like a wall-decayed flesh, ancient and sweet. Candles burned around a circle of bones, and in the center stood the same priest, holding an open book bound in leather. That looked too human. His voice was no longer whispering but chanting. The congregation's muffled voices echoed above, growing louder, blending with the storm and the endless toll of the bells. Amelia crawled backward, her palms scraping bone dust. Then she saw them: Noah, her brother, her mother, all standing behind the priest. Their eyes were gone, hollow sockets leaking black fluid. They answered the bell, the priest said, smiling with teeth too white for a corpse. Now it's your turn. He raised his hands, and the bells above exploded in one deafening, shattering note. The crypt shook violently. The walls bled. Water began pouring in through cracks, thick with mud and something darker. Faces formed in the water, screaming, pleading, pulling her down. Amelia fought, clawing at the ground, gasping for air as the water rose to her neck. The priest's voice became part of the storm, echoing inside her head. When the town forgot the dead remembered the town. She grabbed a rusted cross from the altar, thrust it into the open book. The flames roared up instantly, swallowing everything. The priestess' scream was swallowed by the collapsing ceiling as the bells cracked and fell from above. She was dragged under as the church caved in. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was a single bell sinking into the water, still ringing, still alive. Weeks later, when the floodwaters receded, the people of Willow Town found nothing left where the church once stood, just a blackened patch of land and the twisted frame of a single bell, half buried in the mud. The town sealed off the road, called it cursed. But some nights, when the fog drifts low and the wind comes from the valley, you can still hear it, that lonely, uneven ringing coming from under the earth, tolling for names no one remembers anymore. And somewhere deep beneath, in the drowned ruins of the crypt, a woman's eyes open in the dark as the water ripples and the bell tolls one final time. It was never the church that was haunted. It was the town that forgot how to pray.